What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raffs, of course. We've got Jays we got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
Have you seen the Hines touchdown celebration photo?
I have not.
I didn't see it. I was on AP photos earlier today for reasons that aren't important at this moment in time, and I found it. There's this, and I haven't seen it on social media anywhere. I kind of thought it might blow up because it's one of the coolest photos I've ever seen. It's sort of a wide shot of Nyheim Hines. Wow, that's a tongue twister apparently. Running into the throwing the ball sort of up as he runs into the end zone after the first kick return touchdown, and he's got teammates running behind him celebrating. It's absolutely epic. What a cool thing, and that photo to top it all off. I hope that the person who took it, I'm blanking on their name right now, gets an awful lot of credit and it blows up, because that's everything that makes sports wonderful. Sometimes it's easy to forget about why we love sports so much. Yesterday was not one of those days.
I'm not convinced that wasn't staged. Patriots weren't trying all that hard on that kick return.
I mean, he got a second one just to prove the point.
He did get a second one. That helps. It helps that he got another one. Although he broke 2 tackles on the second one that I've never seen a kick returner break ever. But whether or not, you think for 3 seconds and you think, yeah, okay, I could see it, and then on the other hand, it's probably wasn't the case. But to your point, you're absolutely right. It was cool to see how different teams around the NFL sort of came together to make sure that they were coming together in support of Damar Hamlin, whether it be most teams, if not all of them, who were hosting games, painted an outline around the number 3 on the 30-yard line. On the field, the Chargers and Broncos, the 2 guys on their team that wear the number 3, on the respective teams, came together at center field with the rest of their teams, locking arms behind them. Here in Indianapolis, there are a couple of guys who are very close to Damar Hamlin, and Rodney Thomas, had a mixed day, letting a interception that would have clinched the game for the Colts go through his fingers, but also had another interception. Was very cool to see kind of around the league, that even though it was back to football in a lot of ways, that it didn't fall by the wayside too fast. And eventually it will, because everything does. But this week it didn't, despite it being week 18 and there being plenty of other things to talk about. So that was cool.
Mm-hmm. Here you go. Can you see it?
Oh my goodness, Josh is sharing. Yeah, okay, that's pretty awesome.
Isn't that epic?
Look at Riverside doing the darn thing. Riverside.fm, shouts to our podcast recording software, because we graduated from Zoom a couple months ago at this point. And look at that. I mean, I knew we could share screens, and there Josh goes, just off the cuff with a quick screen share. And you guys can't see it, but a quick screen share there. I love it.
Is that not one of the coolest photos you've ever seen?
But that was very cool. That's a very, very cool photo. But yeah, so very cool NFL weekend, as things didn't fade into the background too quickly. A good weekend in college hoops as well.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about a stacked slate heading into Saturday, and it didn't disappoint for the most part. Got some really good games. We're going to look at 5 of them in particular, 4 of them from Saturday, 1 of them from Sunday, and we're basically going to chat about what the outcome of the game, if the outcome of the game says more about one team or the other, and if there's more to take away from what that means about what that team actually is than the other ones. We've got 5 games there, and we'll walk you through them here momentarily. But before we get to that, It is a Monday. It is time to do winners and losers. So, Josh, who is your winner from the last week?
None other than the Fighting Jerome Tangs.
Yeah, that's the correct answer. That's the
Uh,
correct answer.
We talked about this after the Texas win. They then promptly went and beat Baylor in a really good game. I'm not going to go too long about. We talked about all of this last pod. The one thing I do want to mention, though, here's in these two games, Marquise Noel's stat line. 2 games, as in this week, Texas and Baylor, 68 points, 23 assists. He has 3 point assist double-doubles in his last 4 games. This dude is, the front runner for Big 12 Player of the Year. In position to maybe run away with it. Now, again, there's a long way to go here. Kansas State still has a really difficult schedule coming up. They just happen to see, it seems like they get all the really difficult, in the context of the Big 12, the really difficult games, and it's front loaded where they've got a better stretch at the back end. But what this guy's doing is insane. And of course, what this team is doing, just continuing to win Big 12 games and picking up wins on the road, which, as I mentioned last pod, KenPom didn't have him getting another one all season. And here they are. They already picked one up. It's incredible. This kind of week changes your situation heading into the NCAA tournament, whether it's because it saves you if you have a bad stretch later in the season, or this is the kind of week that gets you from one seed line to the next seed line because you picked up 2 road wins over really good basketball teams in conference play.
As equally as insane it is that he's doing it, it's equally as completely out of the blue. Completely out of the blue.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In his last 3 games, it's 32-14, 36-9, and 23-10. And he's been facilitating all year. Yeah. So that's not new. But his point totals, he had a 29-point performance against Nevada in an overtime game back on November 22nd. But here are his point totals otherwise. 10, 13, 10, 15, 11, 13, 18, 9, 9, 13, 14. Out of absolutely nowhere. And he just decided, oh yeah, when the competition turns to the best conference in the country, that's when I'm going to flip a switch and be a 23-10 guy. Okay. Yeah, at some point, and I don't know off the top of my head what other performances in the Big 12 there.
Mike Miles had the big one. Mike Miles had the big one, but
he's probably got 3 of the 5 best so far, something like that.
He's certainly been the best since Big 12 play started. Hands down, he's been the best player in the conference. Now, can that continue? I don't know. But if he keeps it up, he's the runaway conference player of the year, right? With what they're doing and what he's doing?
Yes. But also if he returns to, I'm curious how much of a lead he might, if he returns to averaging 13 and 9.
Yeah.
Do those first 3 games carry him in the conversation the rest of the way? They might, but that would be because there's no way on God's green earth he's going to keep it up. There's just not.
Right.
Respectfully to Marquise Noel.
Right. I meant more averaging 18 and 8 or something like that.
If he averages 18 and 8, those are basically Frank Mason the third numbers. I think Frank Mason was 20 and 6 or something, 25 and 5 that year that he won National Player of the Year. But yeah, at some point, the other thing is that he just might, his stiffest competition at this point just might be somebody else on his own team. Keontae Johnson in those 2 games that we're alluding to is 28 and 9 and 24 and 9. So,
yeah. Jalen Wilson is quietly having a really good season.
And that would be the one player that would give me hesitation because not only is that the best player, that's the best player on the best team in the conference.
Yeah.
Because Kansas State isn't the best team in the conference.
Yeah.
They're way closer to number 1 than anybody thought they were going to be. But Jalen Wilson, and I don't know off the top of my head, but it wouldn't be surprising if he was the Big 12 Player of the Year preseason.
I think he.
and
I
being
think
Jalen Wilson. I don't know. I mean, maybe it was Mike Miles.
that was my other thought. Yeah.
So I'm not positive, but I'm big on the idea of guys performing who were supposed to perform in terms of the conversation for player of the years. It's just easier for a player that was in the conversation before the season started to win the award than it is for a guy who wasn't, and Marquise Noel was not. Right.
No,
So
it was Mike Miles.
it was Mike Miles. Okay. So
Yes.
I'm sure in the voting that Jalen Wilson was somewhere high up there. And, Mike Miles certainly hasn't been bad. And he was, in their loss to Iowa State, which we'll talk about. He had a lower volume day, but still a really efficient one. But it is an intriguing player of the year race in the Big 12. And if the season ended today, it would certainly have to go to Marquise Noel, and Kansas State would probably have two of the top five in the conversation. So
what a statement that is.
Kansas State is my winner as well. It's hard to beat a team that in the best conference in the country went 2-0 against two of the teams that at least we thought were two of the best teams in the conference. Texas 116-103 win over them, 97-95 over Baylor, both on the road, which is crazy town that we're talking about a 2-0 Kansas State week on the road against Texas and Baylor. But alas, here we are. So they're my winner as well. Who's your loser?
My loser is New Mexico.
Interesting.
We started this week with New Mexico undefeated.
Mm-hmm.
New Mexico then proceeded to lose to Fresno State on the road and then home against UNLV. So you go from 14-0 with wins over St. Mary's, who we've talked about KenPom absolutely loves, and a decent Iona team, to 2-2 in the Mountain West. Was this going to last? No, probably not. But this is the kind of week that really, for a team that doesn't have much margin of error because you're in the Mountain West, to lose back-to-back conference games like that really hurts and sort of takes away some of the cushion that you had built with this really good start you had if you're New Mexico. So not too much to add there. Just when I was thinking about teams that really hurt their NCAA tournament chances and hurt their seeding, to me, it was pretty obvious which team did the most damage to themselves, and that's the Mountain West team that went from being undefeated to having 2 conference losses.
Yeah, they're still even after the week 50th in the net. Still 2-1 in quad 1 and 2 opportunities. They have a quad 3 loss. One of those losses was a quad 3 loss, which isn't great, but still no quad 4 losses. So still in position to be in position if they win at a high clip for the rest of the season. But you're right. We went from, man, that's the only team left in the country that's undefeated, to things are just more stressful for the Lobos waking up this morning, because like you said, the margin of error, just reality of the situation is that you just don't get that many chances once you get to conference play. I mean, and in general, when you play in the Mountain West Conference, but there's a San Diego State team that's 20th at KenPom and it has a decent net ranking. Nevada is a top 60 KenPom team along with Utah State and Boise State. Like, these things, hopefully they'll have some opportunities and get some wins that continue to strengthen their resume, and they'll end up being in a decent spot when it comes to an at-large conversation, because it's going to be difficult for them to win that conference tournament. It just is like, that's not a cakewalk. And so a foregone conclusion that they win that tournament, it certainly is not that. So we'll keep an eye on them throughout the rest of the season. But yeah, it's unfortunate how quickly that that kind of thing can turn when you're a mid-major team. And
if one of those losses had come to San Diego State, it's a different conversation. Right. That's really what I'm getting at here. Is it's not like you lost to the 2 of the other 3 best teams in your conference, where you're going to be able to pick up the wins and it's not going to hurt you. They've built themselves a nice margin of error here with, the way that they started. And right, like you said, have these opportunities. It's not the Mountain West is bad. Just those losses don't look great. It's not like you had a San Diego State loss in there where nobody really expected you to win that game anyway, and it's not a big deal. Now you combine these losses, and now there's that pressure to get that win over San Diego State that is going to be a difficult task because they're also having a really good season.
Right, exactly. My loser is Indiana, and we're going to talk about Indiana a little bit more later in the podcast, so I'll keep this brief. But 2 losses. They jumped out on Iowa fast. They're up like 27-9, something like that. Iowa comes back and wins 81-89. Then they lose to Northwestern inside Assembly Hall 84-83. Those in and of themselves are losses that you can't take if you fancy winning a Big Ten regular season title. And then on top of that, Race Thompson got hurt this week, is out indefinitely, and I'm going to talk more about that later in the podcast. But from a aspirations of winning their conference and their team fundamentally changing in a negative way, Indiana was at the top of that list this week. So the Hoosiers, unfortunately, are my loser this week.
Yeah, I won't add anything else here because, like you said, we're going to talk about them later. The double loss, sort of disappointing how it happened, and losing a key player all in the same week. Very, very unfortunate combination for Mike Woodson.
Yeah. They've lost 4 of their last 6 and 5 of their last 8. So tough stretch for the Hoosiers. And now they get to play Penn State, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan State in the next 4 games because it's the Big Ten and you just never get a break against a truly bad team. They're just waiting for Minnesota on Wednesday, January 25th. That was a ricochet shot at Minnesota. I apologize to the Gophers. But that's winners and losers every single week on Monday. We'll do that through the end of the regular season, through the end of, I suppose, through Selection Sunday. I suppose the Monday before Selection Sunday, because the Monday after Selection Sunday, it's quite obvious who the winners and losers are. But every Monday, winners and losers throughout the rest of the season. Okay, the exercise today is as follows. 5 games from the weekend, and we're deciding what the result says, which team we learned the most about, what it says more about one team or the other based on the result of that game. So the 5 games are as follows. UConn and Creighton. A UConn win at home. Kentucky and Alabama, like clockwork. Kentucky losing big in games against good basketball teams. Auburn versus Arkansas, an Auburn win for the Tigers. Sorry, that's Coach O, my bad. Iowa State TCU, another good Big 12 game there that came down to the wire, and a game that Iowa State won on the road. And then Indiana and Northwestern, as just mentioned. We'll talk about that game as well. Let's start in the Big East. UConn and Creighton. UConn getting a W in that one in Stores. The final score of that game, 69-60, 15-2, 4-2 in the Big East. Creighton now 9-7 and 3-2 in conference play. Their first loss since December 16th. Mr. Doring, let's talk UConn Creighton. Which does this say more about UConn, or does it say more about Creighton?
To me, this says much more about Creighton, which might be the sort of unpopular or minority opinion here, but you go 2 of 16 from 3, you turn the ball over 9 more times than UConn did, and you were still kind of in the game. Now, they were never going to win this game, but there were, until the final 4 or so minutes, they were still, 3 possessions. Maybe if I think they got it to within, maybe they didn't get it into within 6, but there were a couple wide open 3-pointers that could have cut the deficit to, I think it was 6. And they couldn't hit a shot to save their lives, but they were still within single digits. And on top of all of that, Ryan Kalkbrenner did not do much to stop Adama Sanogo. Adama Sanogo had the reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated game here
Mm.
and was absolutely dominant. So, I talked about, I feel like with this UConn team, you have to do a certain amount of things really well to beat them, or else you just, especially in stores, you just have no hope. Creighton didn't do nearly enough of those things and still almost won this game. So I came away kind of thinking, A, if they hit some shots, they're in business, which they had been doing, and it just fell apart in this particular game. And B, if I'm Creighton in terms of maybe not the regular, and they're still right there in the Big East title race in terms of battling with UConn because they both have 2 conference losses now. But just from a hierarchy standpoint, from a conference tournament standpoint, from a rematch standpoint, if I'm Greg McDermott, I come away from this game feeling more confident and being less afraid of UConn than I was before playing that game. For me, I come away more confident that Creighton can still end up getting close to the team that they were supposed to be and potentially evolve into a Final Four contender. I really feel like they have figured things out, and this game was just the game where everything went wrong, and they were still within business, still within striking distance because of their defense and what they were able to do to bother UConn a little bit. They were never winning this game. They didn't play nearly well enough to win. But that was my bigger takeaway was I'm still on board with this Creighton team. I'm going to go down with the ship.
I think it says more about Creighton too. I mean, Sunogo was really good. 10 of 20 for Sunogo is not dominant, not a dominant efficiency performance.
Sure.
Taking 20 shots to get 26 points is not dominant. I mean, he was great, but I mean, he knocked down a pair of threes and it still took him 20 shots to get to 26 points. Creighton is incapable of winning games that they don't play well offensively. Their 7 worst offensive efficiency games, their 7 losses. When they don't shoot it well, they don't win, and they just don't. I don't know what it is, because you would think that a team that's as good as defensively as they are, and right, some of that's without Kalkbrenner and right, yada yada yada. For teams that is as solid defensively as they are, like this was a game. Like at the same time, you held UConn to shooting 35% from the field.
Yeah, right. Oh, if they would have been 5 of 16 from 3, they very well might have won.
Right. And they haven't done that over and over and over again. They've failed to make the 2 more shots that they need to over and over and over again. Their offensive efficiency in wins this year, 120.4 on average. Their efficiency in losses this year on average, 91.9. Their guards, and specifically their guards don't have like, oh, we were just okay games. Mm-hmm. Their guards have, we were really good or we were horrible. Right? Yep. Starting guards were 11 of 36 in this game. And their ugly loss to Marquette, yes, without Kalkbrenner, but specifically talking about the guards, when they lost to Marquette and scored 58 points, 10 of 31 from the field. They just don't have those games where it's like, yeah, you would have loved for them to be a little bit better, but like ultimately they were like 14 of 36 from the field. Like 4 more shots, they would have won the game. 4 more baskets go down, they would have won the game. And to your point, they also seem to be knocking on the door with some really good looks late in the game, and then just couldn't knock any of them down, and then couldn't get a defensive rebound late in the game UConn's last real possession of the game was like 45-50 seconds long, because they got like 3 offensive rebounds on the possession. Mm-hmm. And it went from Creighton's down 6 with 2.5 minutes left to Creighton's down 6 with, I think UConn ended up scoring eventually on the possession. Maybe not. Maybe I'm misremembering that, but I think they did. But it went from, they're down 6 to they're down 6 or 8 with 75 seconds left, because the possession. So that didn't help either. I think it's interesting because I think we're getting at the same point with, optimism versus pessimism.
Yep.
Because here, like, it makes me feel like anytime Creighton doesn't have it in the first half, I'm just gonna assume they're gonna lose if it's a good team, because they never seem to really find it at any point. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And because it's just gonna be hard to, against the best teams in the country, which is, you'll have to beat the best teams in the country to go to the Final Four, right? Like, how often are you going to do better than holding Jordan Hawkins, Andre Jackson, Alex Karaban, and Tristan Newman to 4 field goals combined from 2-point range? Like, and they made a combined, they made 6 3-pointers combined. So they got 10 field goals between those 4 players. It's just putting a lot of pressure on your defense. And I am a believer in Creighton's offense with Kalkbrenner on the floor and the things that he unlocks for the offense. But the unfortunate reality is that sometimes those guards just can't hit the broadside of a barn. I mean, on Christmas Day, Trey Alexander had 32, and in this game, he was 3 of 14 from the floor for 11 points. Like, I think that's just kind of the reality of the situation. Baylor Scheierman is awesome. Baylor Scheierman is not an efficient Big East scorer, and it's been that way all season. So, yeah, I'd love to see them not shoot it well and beat a good team. That's kind of where I am with Creighton right now, and just find a way to win it. And I don't really know if there's a larger point to make there other than simply that. But that's interesting, because I think we were getting at the same point with different perspective.
Yeah, I'll just stick to the idea that a lot of that happened without Kalkbrenner, and before they got sort of back to looking like themselves at the start of Big East play here until this game. Right, in the last few weeks, this has been the exception, not the rule.
And so it's also Butler, DePaul, and Seton Hall.
Yeah, that's 3 bad Big East teams. So
unless Seton Hall's playing Butler, then it's the best team.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the question is, okay, when you get a game against Xavier, when you get a game against Marquette,
mm-hmm.
when you get a game against Providence, who maybe aren't UConn, and specifically UConn on the road, and aren't the bottom of the Big East, what does that look like? We just don't really know the answer to that question yet. That's where I'm holding out hope.
And we'll know by the next time we podcast. They play Xavier and Providence this week. So We'll know by the next time. By the next Monday pod we do. We'll have a better idea of that. Okay, moving forward. Kentucky, Alabama, like I said before, as we were introing the segment here, death taxes, and Kentucky gets run off the floor by a good basketball team. At the very least, Kentucky looks outclassed by a good basketball team. Final score here, 78-52. It was close for the first 10 minutes, and then it was very much not close for the next 30. And that's just kind of been the nature of the beast for Kentucky this year, is that when they play a good team, they don't play well. And they're not even giving themselves chances to win these basketball games late in the second half. So what say you? Does this tell you more about Alabama or tell you more about Kentucky?
Kentucky, because it's hard to take anything away for Alabama doing what what history suggested they were going to do to this Kentucky team.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say that much about Kentucky either, because it's not like any of this is new. The one point I want to make, though, is, and I think Seth Greenberg pointed this out at halftime, and I hadn't really thought about it this way, but it was an astute observation. If you think, I mean, you're very much on board with this idea. If you think Kentucky's offense is bad when Oscar Tshiebwe is doing Oscar Tshiebwe things, now when you have Charles Bediako to play him one-on-one and actually bother him, and I know you're probably going to get to your favorite stat of the weekend, which is how poor Kentucky's some of their best, most important players, including Tshiebwe, were in this game. If you can guard him one-on-one and don't have to always double, that's what I came away thinking about, right? Is that this entire offense is based around Tshiebwe demanding double teams. Not just Tshiebwe, but Tshiebwe forcing the defense to do other things than just guard him.
Sure.
And Alabama just don't have to do that. And so now you've got that combined with Alabama's length and athleticism, which also bothered Houston. They're just difficult to deal with because they've got all these, super long wingspan NBA looking guys.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and they've got a solid defensive center who can hold his own against Sheboy. That's just a formula for disaster for Kentucky. That's really all I have to say about it.
Yeah, it's just a continuation of what we've seen all season. Right. Their best win is Michigan, which Michigan getting to Big Ten play has made that win look a little better. Still not great. Their losses, Michigan State in overtime, and then Gonzaga by double digits, UCLA by double digits, Missouri by double digits, and oh yes, Alabama by double digits. It's pretty stunning how this team just doesn't get up for big games. Because like even the worst teams in the country get up for big games sometimes. And you would think that at some point Kentucky was just going to have a Kentucky, well, I suppose a different performance, because I suppose the argument is that this is a Kentucky performance at this point. And they just don't. Yes, my favorite stat of the weekend is that Jacob Topp and Oscar Tshiebwe and Cason Wallace were 3 of 30 from the field. They took 2 free throws. 2. Listen, Oscar Tshiebwe being the force that he is, him only taking 2 free throws in a game is crazy. Crazy. 9 points, 30 shots. They're 1-5 in quad 1 and 2 opportunities this season, 0-4 in quad 1 specifically. Like this is, if the tournament started tomorrow, Kentucky's probably not in the tournament. Here's a list of teams for fun that have more quad 1 wins than Kentucky. Are you ready? Lock in. Buckle up. Weber State, Southern Illinois, UC Irvine, Northwestern State. Trivia time. Where's Northwestern State?
Louisiana.
Is it? I didn't actually
I'm pretty sure.
I was hoping you knew because I had absolutely no clue. Let's look.
That's not fair if you're going to throw a trivia time at me and you don't know the answer.
Well, do you know where in Louisiana?
No.
I'm going to butcher it bad. Natchitoches?
Oh.
Natchitoches?
I had
Natchitoches?
One of my professors at Butler was friends with was a professor there before. At one point I knew how to pronounce that. I don't remember anymore. Okay. That's right. Yep, that city. Mm-hmm.
Northwestern State, 250th at KenPom, has more quad 1 wins than Kentucky. Grand Canyon, FGCU, and then Florida Atlantic and Sam Houston, they have 2 more quad 1 wins than John Calipari's Kentucky team. It's crazy. I mean, and I was on this podcast at the beginning of the season, before the season started, thinking that I was a little bit crazy for picking somebody else other than Kentucky to win the SEC. And now here we are on January 9th, and the words, I'm not sure Kentucky's a tournament team, nor do I have faith in Kentucky to put a tournament resume together in the last 2 months of the season. That's a crazy thing to say. And if you ask me to bet, I'd probably still bet on Kentucky making the tournament. But they do have work to do. Like, that is, like, straight up, they have work to do if they want to get in the tournament. They can't just coast and only beat the teams that they should beat the rest of the way. Because now that at this point, that list of teams is not good enough for them to make the tournament in March.
Yeah, that was probably the smartest thing you've said this season.
I know, right? There are a couple of like swing and misses. Like at one point, I was questioning whether or not Kansas was going to be that good. Kansas is really good.
Yeah.
But there are some things that I'm proud of from preseason. That's one of them. Different SEC game. Here we go. Auburn and Arkansas. In Auburn, the Tigers, not Ed Orgeron, sorry.
You're just going every SEC school other than OSU that's the Tigers.
The Tigers get a 72-59 win at Neville Arena. What say you? This is 13-point win for Auburn in a building that is really not fun to play in. At this point in the lifespan of Auburn men's basketball, any team losing at Neville Arena is just not that big of a deal. But it is an Arkansas team with high expectations, an Arkansas team that's had a weird season for multiple different reasons. What did this outcome tell you more? Did it tell you more about Arkansas or more about Auburn?
Arkansas, just because I feel very much like we know who Auburn is, and the guards made some shots. They weren't uber efficient, but Wendell Green had a good game. They made enough shots, and Auburn, like you said, just doesn't lose at home. It's not a thing that happens. So ultimately, I don't have too much to take away from that. On the Arkansas side, and I also just want to talk about Arkansas for a minute. That's part of this too, because this is getting really interesting for me. And it sounds like Nick Smith is at least going to be another couple weeks. We're talking about, it sounds like a best case scenario, some kind of February return. And it just seems like every time I watch Arkansas without him, they just, outside of Anthony Black and Ricky Council, they just don't have a way to create offense. And it's really, really difficult to watch at times as a result. Now, and we were talking while we were watching this game about the idea that, if Ricky Council is doing what Ricky Council is doing, and you would have just given that piece of information with no context, the logical conclusion would have been Arkansas looks like potentially the best team in the country, if not the best team in the country, because he wasn't supposed to be this player. And he's been really good, which is why they've kind of been able to survive. But he goes 5 of 15 in this game, and that's kind of, Anthony Black was really, really good. But that's the end of the story. You're not beating Auburn, and you're not beating Auburn at home for sure with one guy. And the bigger point I want to get to here and have a little bit of a conversation about is, we talked about preseason, this idea that all the pieces fit, right? Because Nick Smith is kind of your bucket getter, Anthony Black is your facilitator, Jordan Walsh is your defender, Trevin Brazile and your other pieces on the interior are your additional athleticism, your rebounding, your pick and roll, that nothing overlaps and nobody sort of takes away each other's strengths. And losing Brazile is a big deal because he had been really good. Watching Nick Smith a little bit that we've got to see him, he just looks different. And without him, the pieces just don't fit, because now Anthony Black has to be your scorer and your facilitator, which in terms of guys helping their draft stock, he's been really good and proven he can do both of those things. But that's a lot of pressure to put on him. Ricky Council now has to be an efficient, high-level scorer in the SEC, which is not what he was supposed to be. And if one of them has a bad game, now you're asking these other guys who are not shot creators to be shot creators because you don't have your shot creator, which is Nick Smith. So I'm still holding. It's not that I'm actually overall worried. Now, the Brazile injury may end up being a big deal in terms of what their ceiling is. If they can get a healthy Nick Smith back, to me, this is still a Final Four caliber team. But they need a healthy Nick Smith back, or it's just going to be a struggle on offense sometimes.
Real quick on Auburn, I'm not ready for what you said. This is Auburn winning a game at home. They don't lose a game at home last season. It's been the late stages of the 2020-21 season since Auburn lost a game at home. It's also a team that since December 10th has losses to Memphis, USC, and Georgia, and they got handled by Georgia in the last 7 days. So we can stop at the, hey, Auburn's guards played well and it was at home, right? And when those two things happen, it's going to be really hard to beat Auburn. What you've said is spot on. And the unfortunate reality, I think, and I'm out on their Final Four potential unless something drastically changes. Because at some point, five-star freshmen who have been in and out of the lineup all season don't just show up and then play great in the tournament. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, he needs to be back in early February and get a month under his belt to have any hope of being what Eric Musselman wants and kind of needs him to be. Yeah, I'm with you there.
And the thing that the player that I think of most, the player I think of first when I think of that is Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving was clearly different at Duke that year he was at Duke, but he missed a lot of the season, came back right before the tournament, and then Duke got bounced early. If for, and it's not like Irving was bad. It just was, it was a freshman who still hadn't really played college basketball yet. And as good as Nick Smith looks, nagging injuries are already concerning, right? It's not like he did something structural and it healed and he's going to come back. It's like it's nagging and he's kind of in and out of the lineup, and he hasn't been healthy all season.
And it sounds like they're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on and how to fix it, which is concerning.
Right. And I also, I was a big believer in what Trevon Brazile meant for that basketball team. At this point, Arkansas is the team that I just feel like we're going to look back and see that roster, and we're going to be like, oh man, that roster was crazy. And then we're going to look a little closer and realize that we never really saw that team at full strength. Yeah. And now Brazile's out for the season. We're never going to see this team at full strength. Now, if Nick Smith is healthy and playing well, we're a whole lot closer. And to your point, the most important pieces at that point fit together a little bit better. So in theory, their ceiling is still high. And I'm not necessarily out on them as a Final Four team because I don't think their ceiling when everybody is healthy isn't high enough. I do think it's high enough. I just don't think we're ever going to see it. And that sucks because it's really tough in the maybe overblown, as we were also talking about this weekend, the overblown conversation about how many players aren't choosing to go to college when a heck of a lot of players are still choosing to go to college, especially this year when a lot of the guys in the draft that we're talking about are not playing college basketball this year, whether it's Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson. That Nick Smith was kind of third in that conversation, and we were going to get to see him in college. I really hope that he gets healthy and that we get to see him for, even if Arkansas doesn't go deep in the tournament, that we get him for 6 weeks, at the end of the tournament and then the SEC tournament and, maybe a couple games in the field of 68. So I hope that I'm wrong about that. And that by the time we get to March 9th, 2 months from today, that we feel like Arkansas is a title contender, but as they're presently constructed and with my faith that he'll actually be all cylinders go by that point, I don't consider them a contender, which sucks. Because they're fun. They got a lot of really fun, talented players. And it just right now isn't as working as seamlessly as we were hoping it would.
And that's because, the pieces Eric Musselman had or thought he had, he doesn't have, right?
Right.
It's not that something necessarily went wrong other than it's just, and not that you were suggesting that. Yeah, it's not the team that they were supposed to have,
right? Which
is unfortunate. And I'm holding out. I'm with you that if you're asking me, am I going to consider Arkansas a Final Four contender when we're making NCAA tournament brackets? My answer right now is no. I'm just holding out a slight smidgen of hope that we feel very differently in a month and a half when Nick Smith is back and looks like himself. Will that happen? Who knows?
I think that's a very fun thing to hope.
Yes.
And certainly more fun than just assuming that he's never going to be right in his college career, which would not be fun. Okay. Moving to the Big 12. Not back to the Big 12, right? We haven't had a Big 12 game yet. So moving to the Big 12. Iowa State TCU. First of all, okay, 69-67 win for Iowa State. They're up by 8 with 2 minutes left in this game. Then probably the most poorly managed 90 seconds of college basketball I've ever seen from the Cyclones. And then perhaps the most hectic final possession that leads to a game-winning shot I've ever seen. Certainly this season. It's certainly the wildest ending to a game I've seen this year. All ends with Gabe Kelcher, eventually ending up with the basketball on the 3-point line, and he hits a 3 with, a second and a half left. And it wasn't tied. Iowa State had given up the lead. It was 67-66 in favor of TCU after I believe it was 66-58. I believe that was the score.
It was something like that.
I think they went on a 9-0 run because they hit a 3 and then the press got some turnovers and then there was a travel and yeah, it was bad. There were a couple of like, why are you taking that shot when there's 24 seconds left on the shot clock? What is going on? That kind of thing. But it ended with a Gabe Kelcher 3-pointer, 69-67. The Cyclones are 12-2 and 3-0 in conference play. Who does this say more about?
Oh, Iowa State, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it was funny because I had a prior commitment and couldn't watch the end of this game, so I watched it as long as I could, and it was about 2 minutes left, I think, and they were up 8 or something, and I thought, okay, this game, I saw what I needed to see. Then about 15 minutes later, I checked the score on my phone, and they were losing, and then I checked it again when I had the opportunity, and I went, oh, they actually won. Well, how did that happen? It was a very strange series of events. Yeah. Here's my trivia time for you. Okay. Like you said, this is Iowa State's third Big 12 win of the season. Do you know when their third Big 12 win came last season? What day?
I also have Big 12 stats, but I don't have this one specifically compared to last year. January 28th.
Oh, very close. 26th.
Okay.
It was game 8. So they started 3-5 last season, right? Because they had, I mean, I think the first game was Baylor, so
it was,
you're not losing. I mean, you're not winning that one. But then they had some close road losses, lost a game probably they shouldn't at home. I think they beat Texas Tech at home. It wasn't a great start after that undefeated non-conference. Yep. So that's the first part of this, is they're winning Big 12 games at a consistent clip. That was something they struggled to do last season. Mm-hmm. Second, and this is really just the point I want to make, and kind of my theory as to why this has started so much better for TJ Otzelberger. Last year's team, if Isaiah Brockington wasn't scoring in isolation, they were really just kind of doomed. I mean, maybe they could beat you 48-46, but that was the only hope. Right? To the Creighton conversation we were having earlier, they actually did win some games solely based on their defense. But also, you're playing in the Big 12, you're not going to get away with that very often. So sometimes Isaiah Brockington was good enough to give them the offense they needed, and they got, the 62-54 win. This game, 5 guys finished in double figures, 2 of whom came off the bench, and there are 3 guys on this team, and Jaren Holmes, Gabe Kelcher, and Caleb Grill. This is kind of a weird statement, but those 3 guys who could be this team's leading scorer on any given night. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that actually mean? It's still a fair question, right? I think Kelcher led the team with 15 points in this game. It's not like he had 30.
That's correct.
But Caleb Grill has, gotten to the 25-point mark a couple times. Jaren Holmes has had some really good games as well. When you play defense the way they do, all you need is 1 or 2 guys to have a good game. And they're in a much better position to have that this season because they're not reliant on one guy. You don't know where the scoring is coming from every game, but they've gotten it pretty consistently from somebody. Caleb Grill was really poor in this game, and it didn't matter because the rest of the team picked him up. The bench picked him up. Mm-hmm. Against North Carolina, he more or less single-handedly won that game. They're just so much more balanced on the offensive end, and that gives me a lot more optimism about their ceiling and their ability to keep this up in conference play. So that's TCU. I feel the exact same about I did before this game, so that's why I went with Iowa State.
I think Iowa State does a couple things. One, they're a team that their coaches figured out how to get absolutely everything out of.
Yep.
Like, it was Caleb Grill who had just randomly had 32 points, right?
Yeah, against North Carolina.
It was against North Carolina, and he just hadn't had 20 before in his entire college career. Or he'd gotten to 20 twice.
Twice, and one of them was at UNLV, I think. Yeah.
What in the world? Come on. What are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah, he's turned into somehow, someway turned into a really good Big 12 player. Exactly. Yeah.
And the other part is that it just seems like Iowa State has we're going to win all the close games we're in this year. Their 2 losses, they've just kind of lost in convincing fashion, right? They lost to UConn by 18, and they lost to Iowa by 19. Their best wins, right? They beat Villanova in overtime, 81-79. They beat North Carolina by 5. And then in the Big 12, right, they handled Baylor convincingly at home, 77-62. But these last two games, they won 63-60 on the road, and they won 69-67 on the road. Now, granted, this 69-67 win where they needed the 3-pointer to win the game probably shouldn't have been. It didn't need to be that stressful. It was, but at the end of the day, they ended up with more points than the other team. And I don't really know how else to put it other than they're just the team that's going to figure out how to have more points than the other team by the end of it. Whatever that means, whether that's, hey, Caleb Grill, can you give us 30, please? Or, hey, Gabe Kelcher, we're going to throw the ball up around like a volleyball for the last 17 seconds of this game. But, hey, can you make a 3 for us with 3 seconds left? Yeah, I got you. I don't really know how else to describe it but their defense is going to keep them in it. They're the best turnover rate team in the country defensively, turning teams over on 30% of their possessions, which is crazy, by the way. They don't do a ton great offensively. They just don't. But to your point, they do enough on enough nights. They're going to beat a lot of teams this year. And the last thing I want to say is, like, I'll be stunned if it slows down the way that it slowed down in Big 12 play last year. Mm-hmm. And, like, yes, because they're 3-0, and like you said, it took them 20 more days last year to get to 3 conference wins, and they're 3-0 right now. They were 12-0 going into conference play last year, finished 22-13, and that was with 2 wins in the NCAA tournament. I believe they finished 20-11 in the regular season, so they lost 11 of their last, 19 games, right? I think they finished 7-11 in conference.
I think that's what it was.
Oh, because they played a random non-conference game in the middle of their conference schedule, so that's where the other one came from. Yeah. So they won 8 of their last 19 games. 3-0 this year, and the other part specifically that I want to touch on is is 2 of those games were on the road. Do you know how many road ones they had last year in Big 12 play?
I'll say 1.
It's more than I thought it was. It was 3. I thought it was going to be 1 or 2.
Yeah.
It was 3, which is still not very many. But, like, honestly, going 3-6 on the road in Big 10 and Big 12 play is, like, not horrible. But they weren't great at home either. They haven't lost at home yet this year. And they only they've lost 1 true road game. Their UConn loss was on a neutral court, and they lost to Iowa on the road. But they found 2 wins on the road. That's 66% of the way to the mark they were last year. 3-0 in conference, and they've already played Baylor and TCU once. Now, your reward: you get to play Texas Tech, Kansas, and Texas in the next 10 days or 8 days, excuse me. And then you follow that up with Oklahoma, Kansas State, Missouri, Texas Tech, Kansas, all before February 5th. You're welcome. Welcome to the Big 12. But, and we were talking about this a little bit with Kansas State, that Iowa State is also now in a position that they're going to have to shoot themselves in both foots and maybe chop off one of their own legs to not get into the tournament. They've put themselves in a really, really good position at this point, and I'll be very surprised if it slows down. Yeah. At least to the extent that it did last year.
Right. Now the question is the same with both teams, and is, can they keep pace with Kansas? Mm-hmm. And if Texas finds a way to stay in that conversation as well. And TCU theoretically as well. You know, none of these teams, right? Baylor's the one team that was in that title conversation that has really struggled at the beginning of Big 12 play. Everybody else is hanging in there just fine. Are Iowa State and Kansas State able to make themselves factors, or are they going to finish 12-6, 2-3 games back of first place and get themselves 5-6 seeds, have phenomenal seasons, and never be worried about their NCAA tournament hopes, but also never, quite get to that real contender status? Or are we going to look up and, they're 8-1 halfway through conference play?
Mm-hmm. Trivia time. How many games is Kansas supposed to win the Big 12 by via KenPom?
I'll say 15.
They're going to win the Big 12 by 15 games?
Oh. I thought you meant how many Big 12 games are they going to win?
Oh, no. It's less than 15, though.
Okay, I'll say 2 games.
3. They're
Really?
projected to go 13-5, and Kansas State and Iowa State are projected to go 10-8.
Wow.
All 3 teams are 3-0 right now. Texas is the only other team projected to finish over 500 in conference play. So yes, that means TCU is not projected to go over 500 in conference play.
That's wild.
I know, right?
I don't know how I feel about that.
Wait, and part of me is like, what are you doing, Ken Pomeroy? And the other part of me is like, well, somebody's got to lose games, and maybe they just all of those teams, maybe Kansas does end up 13-5, and there are 6 teams in the middle that finish somewhere between 8-10 and 10-8, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think TCU is going to finish under 500 in conference play, but it's not ludicrous when you think about it for a couple more seconds than the gut reaction. Anyways, Iowa State and TCU delivering good Big 12 games. Shouts to the Big 12. By the way, those are 2 teams that the Big 12's not missing, not losing. Just FYI.
Mm-hmm. As is Kansas.
As is Kansas, right?
And Kansas State.
And in Kansas State. I think it's going to be okay. They're not adding any good basketball programs either, are they?
Of course not.
No, absolutely not. Anyways, last but certainly not least, maybe it is least, I don't know. Indiana Northwestern. Northwestern walks into Assembly Hall and beats Indiana 84-83. Kind of jumped on them early, and Indiana was able to claw back and not quite come up with a victory. This is actually an outcome that we got last year as well. At least I believe. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I don't know what I was remembering, but it wasn't that. They did lose to Northwestern, but it was on the road. Indiana, 84-83 loss to Northwestern. We touched on this in winners and losers, but to continue the conversation, for me, this says way more about Indiana than it says about Northwestern. And it's like truly unfortunate because it says something about Indiana that is just kind of out of their control. And 175 points combined the Hoosiers have given up in their last 2 games. 175. 91 to Iowa and 84 to Northwestern. That's a lot of points. That's a lot of points for a team that coming into the season and early in the season was supposed to be one of the 20 best defenses in the country. And for most of the season, they have been. But it's a team that finished 24th at KenPom defensively last year. They're 42nd this morning. And it's not anybody's fault other than the fact that their best defenders are hurt. At least 2 of their best 3 defenders. Right? Xavier Johnson is out. Race Thompson is out indefinitely. Mike Woodson isn't exactly sunshine and rainbowy about when Xavier Johnson is going to come back. And having a foot issue is never a good thing when you're a college basketball player. But it's pretty clear that their defense isn't anywhere near as good as it is with Race Thompson and Xavier Johnson on the floor. There are a couple other things I want to touch on as well, but that's kind of where it starts for me. You can't let Northwestern walk in and score 84 points on you in your own building. You just can't let it happen. And they're learning that if you give up more than 80 points, even when you score, because that's the other part of this that's frustrating, they've scored 83 and 89 points in these last 2 games. And it hasn't mattered because they've given up so many points. We've been pessimistic about Indiana, or at least not as high on Indiana. I wouldn't say pessimistic. I think both of us have conceded that that's a good basketball team without wanting to go all the way to maybe the ceiling that other people thought they were going to have. But it's unfortunate that a team that their season was as anticipated as Indiana's was, that it looks like it might be one that ultimately is dictated by the guys that didn't get to be on the floor rather than the guys that were.
Yeah, and I would have loved to make this about Northwestern. There's just no way to.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said, that they shot 50% from 3. Again, right, taken out of context, you give that piece of information, I don't care how good of a season Northwestern's having. There's no way Northwestern wins that game.
Mm-hmm.
but you've seen the defensive struggles these past couple games, and right, the offense has not been the issue. It's not, in fairness to Indiana, it's not the things that are the problems right now are not the things that you and I have been highlighting since the very beginning about why this team has limitations. And the injuries certainly have a lot to do with that. You can probably survive without one of those two guys, at least for a little while, right? There's been some other guys, incredibly important players who have been in and out of the lineup a little bit, and they seem to be navigating okay, not where the Indiana fan base wants them to be. But now you lose these two at the same time, and the defense is just kind of falling apart. And the other issue in this game was the turnover difference. If you look at, I kind of like looking at box scores and trying to figure out why games went the way they did, because sometimes it just doesn't make a lot of sense outside of one area, and that area in this game was turnovers. But when you're that poor defensively, every possession gets magnified because you're not getting stops. And so now you're making Northwestern's life easier because you're turning the ball over, and you're not making up for it by, holding them in the half court when you're not turning the ball over and letting them get out in transition. And this is the result.
And not playing defense heightens the other thing, which is that their role players just need to not be asked to do that much. Right? They have 4 really, really good college basketball players on that team. And they have 8 good college basketball players on that team. They have 4 really good ones, and I think 2 elite ones. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis is elite, and Jalen Hood-Schifino, we haven't mentioned it yet, but he had 33 and on 12 of 17 shooting in this game. He had 6 turnovers, but that's to be expected when you're a freshman with the ball in your hands that much as a result of your veteran running mate being injured. Those 2 guys, Trayce Jackson-Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino, were combined 51 points on 15 of 29 from 2-point range, and Jalen Hood-Schifino was 5 of 7 from deep. That's pretty good. The rest of the team had 31 points on 9 field goals. And from a efficiency standpoint, they were just fine, but none of those guys are being asked to score at the volume that you'll need if your defense isn't going to be very good. And the unfortunate part about it is that Xavier Johnson is the head of the snake, so to speak, when it comes to defensive ball pressure. And he's one of those guys that can take lots of shots, is willing to take a lot of shots, and can have 20 points on any given night, right? That's the other unfortunate part of it, because without him and Race Thompson, you lose interior defense and lose rebounding.
A little bit of versatility in there, and a little bit in terms of switching.
Right, 100%. Yeah. But with Johnson, not only do you lose some of your options offensively, you lose kind of point man number 1 on the defensive side. So it's a double-edged sword in that sense, the worst kind of double-edged sword, because both issues are kind of glaring at the same time.
Yeah, it's another one of those things that in theory, right, both of these guys are back at some point. If you can just hang in there and give yourself a chance heading into the Big Ten tournament and give yourself a chance heading into the NCAA tournament, all hope is not lost. There are reasons why this is happening. It's not just that this team isn't good enough collectively at full strength. The question, very similar to Arkansas, is do you ever see, and Arkansas, like we said, the answer is no because of the Brazil injury, but of the pieces potentially available still, do you get them back at all at full strength at some point? Or is this just a constant battle all season to try and get Thompson and Johnson on the floor, and one of them comes back but they don't look like themselves, or you don't get them back enough to kind of get that cohesion, and you've already really took a tumble in Big Ten play because they're both out for another month. It's disappointing again because it's difficult to then make a commentary on this season because it's just impossible to tell how good they really are. Clearly they're good at full strength. Clearly they're not the best team in the Big Ten at full strength, but where in the hierarchy are they? And you can't evaluate that right now without Xavier Johnson and Race Thompson. I
would be surprised if we see Race Thompson again this season, which is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
And Xavier Johnson's been out for a while, and it's still when Mike Woodson is asked about it in press conferences, it's still very abstract. And I would be surprised if we don't see Xavier Johnson again. They're kind of on both ends of the spectrum. I would be a little surprised if we see Race Thompson again, based on the injury he got. Like I wouldn't be stunned if it's actually an ACL tear and they just haven't told people yet, or getting a second opinion kind of thing. With Xavier Johnson, I think they were pretty clear up front it was going to be a little while, but you would love, I think it's been almost a month since that injury, I think, that you would love to have something a little bit more concrete. So hopefully both of them come back. My bet for the over under would not be over under 1.5. It would probably be over under half a player coming back, which is unfortunate. Anything else today?
Got a national championship game tonight.
Apparently.
That's all.
Totally forgot about that, by the way, until about 11 o'clock on Sunday night. There you go. That tells you how plugged into the college football season I am. All I'm asking for is for the game to not be over at 8:30. That's all I'm asking for. Game starts at 7:40. If it's just not over at 8:30, I'll count it as a win. It's pretty low.
Keep it interesting, Horned Frogs.
It's pretty low bar for a national championship game, isn't it?
I mean, how much can you expect after those semifinals, though? Are we asking for too much? Because the semis delivered in a
no.
big way.
I am not asking for too much. Asking for the national championship game to be competitive. No, Josh, I am not asking too much. I'm not. Maybe for college football, I am. But in general, asking a national championship to be competitive after semifinals are competitive, that's not asking too much. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod. Check out the YouTube. Bite-sized content there, both in short form and segmentized subject form, as well as the full podcast on our YouTube channel. TikTok as well, even smaller bite-sized, maybe fun-sized content, if you will, on the TikTok vertical video format. So you can find that at Jays for Days Pod pretty much everywhere. If you search it up, you should find us on the various social media platforms. We'll be back later in the week to, I don't know, we'll see. I don't know what we're talking about. We'll figure it out at that point. But talk to you on Thursday. We will, to channel my inner Yoda. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh, and we will see you later.